Hello everyone, I'm Dr. Heather Melville, OBE, Board Trustee at CMI, Chartered Companion and Chair of CMI Women. I'm also Director of Client Relationship Programs and Head of People Business Networks at PwC. Thank you for joining us on International Women's Day to share ideas and build relationships. I'm sure it will definitely be international. In this past year, we have shifted our conversation almost entirely online, and nearly as many people joining CMI events have been based around the world as in the UK. It's no surprise why we have all experienced a global crisis of the most serious magnitude. Managers and leaders across the world have had to face into uncharted waters and navigate their people through this storm whilst being battered and feeling exposed themselves. For so many people, the past year has involved tragedy, anxiety, and stress. And it's clear from our research that well-being is an essential part of every manager's role. Everyone has been hard hit in some way, but we all know that some people and groups have been hit harder. Chartered Companion Samantha Allen, Chief Executive of the NHS Foundation Trust, will share the everyday courage our health and social care workers have needed to find themselves and share with others. Air Vice Marshal Maria Byford, Chief of Staff Personnel for the RAF, will explain how those in the services have managed to be so effective during this time of national need. If you, like me, have been fortunate enough to have a vaccination, you will know just how professionally managed that has been. Chartered Companion Dr. Cordelia Bart Stewart, OBE, will shine a light on the world of justice, crucial to trust in society and business, yet too often taken for granted or overlooked. My PwC colleague, board member Alison Statham, Chief Risk Officer and General Counsel, and Mike McNicholas, Managing Director of Atkins, will share their experiences as leaders shouldering the duty of guiding large businesses through the crisis with so many people relying on them. And finally, I'm delighted that the Chief Executive of the Chartered Management Institute, Anne Franca, OBE, will share her experiences of social enterprise and activism. Anne chose to challenge the UK government on its decision to suspend enforcement of gender pay gap reporting last year, and the CMI community organised to make change happen, and fast. There is nothing more important as we face the big challenges for a better future. We simply need the best leadership and management. Anything less, we should all choose to challenge. Please do ask your questions for the panel using the chat. I'll be asking some of them later in the conversation. And following that, you will have the opportunity to discuss further in our themed networking rooms. But for now, let's get started. So, I'd like to ask each of the panel how it feels to be them right now. And, during this challenging time, it's so important that we capture that. So I'm going to start with you, Sam. After such an intense year, how does it feel to be a female leader in the NHS right now?
Oh, thank you, Heather. So, I've never been prouder to work in the NHS, and I think the everyday courage shown by everybody right across the NHS, all of our public sector services, has been absolutely phenomenal. And I sit here after attending our own event across the NHS with 5,000 women today, and it was a real opportunity to celebrate all that they've contributed over the past year. To see, for example, the team that have really spearheaded and led the vaccinations from regulation right the way through to deployment and administering vaccinations was just brilliant. 78% of our workforce in the NHS are women. That's 1 million women. But equally today provided an opportunity to pause and reflect, to think about recovery and how recovery starts with self. And I think particularly the emotional and physical burden that women have experienced over the past year. On average, women have been doing about an additional 15 to 20 hours at work and increased caring responsibilities, homeschooling, looking after others, as well as providing the care that we have seen on the front line, through our own TV screens over the past year. It's been a tough year. And I think what's uppermost in our minds right now is how do we take the learning that we've gained over the past year, and not just recover ourselves and recover the NHS. We've got growing waiting lists, but also put back better, and better in a way that can really advance and accelerate gender equality. So things like the flexible working that we've seen, we've accelerated the use of digital. So I think that's what's uppermost in the mind of women working across the NHS now, how to put it back better, but also to recover what has been a very challenging period that has had that emotional and physical toll on them. So days like today, on International Women's Day, where we can come together in solidarity, are really important to celebrate. But it's a reminder of how much more we've got to do. And, to know that gender equality perhaps won't be achieved in my lifetime or that of my child's, something that across the health service we feel passionate about. And we do have a gender pay gap of approximately 18%, but in some organisations up to 40%. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Wow. Thank you very much for that. Maria, the support provided by the military throughout the crisis has been widely praised. How does it feel to be a female leader in the RAF right now?
Oh, thanks very much for your question, Heather. So I guess I'd probably start off and say, first of all, I feel empowered. I'm really lucky to be one of a group of senior female leaders in the organisation. Myself, Air Marshal Sue Gray, and Air Vice Marshals Claire Walton and Tam Jennings represent quite a significant number across all three services of senior women. So it's great to have that trust and empowerment. I also feel really proud of our organisation's response. We respond whatever we're asked to do, whether it's a combat situation, whether it's defending our skies against threats, or whether it's supporting the national resilience, which is what we've been engaged in the last 12 months. And I'm really proud of some of the very junior people who've been out on the streets and in the mass testing centres and in the mass vaccination centres. Some of those people have only just joined the organisation. We had ab initio trainees that had only been in the Air Force a matter of weeks, who were, for example, in Merthyr Tydfil, helping to do the mass testing prior to Christmas. These are really young people, but who show themselves to be really quality individuals. So I'm really proud of everything that we've been able to do to help support the nation. And then I think finally, I feel quite responsible as well for the future and for getting the culture of our organisation right. And making sure that we're in the situation where everyone feels that they can bring their true selves to work and that they have the best possible lived experience they can have while they're serving in the Royal Air Force. So I'm empowered, I'm proud, but I also feel responsible for the future.
Wow, that word's come up quite a lot today, empowered. So we're going to take that through as we speak later on. Cordella, now you have been awarded an OBE this year for services to the legal profession and voluntary service to diversity in education. How does it feel to be you right now?
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you to the CMI for having me on this panel. And I think I'll probably keep up the empowered theme as well then, because I think that encapsulates it, how it feels right now. And proud to be a senior lawyer, senior woman lawyer. But other than that, I think the same as when I was 16 and told by a careers officer that it was too hard for girls to be lawyers and perhaps I should do shop work. And a few weeks later, I was told by an immigration officer, as I was born in Jamaica, but came here as a young child, I wasn't British, and put a line through my landing card. And both incidents have stayed with me throughout my life, really, although I didn't connect either incident to gender or colour. I shrugged them off, persevered, and with what I know with the pandemic adversely affecting women more than men globally, I still think that's the position, that we have to keep up that resilience and force change. It's also important, though, as I'm one of the 60% of solicitors who are not in large corporations. The solicitors profession, a lot of us are small firms, high street practices. So some of us do what we do through choice, that we want to help ordinary people. Some are there because there are barriers in terms of gender and culture. So in terms of the work I do, I wanted to carry out a particular type of work, and I felt that to do that and have control of what I do, I needed to set up my own firm. I knew where I wanted to work, and I moved from a central London firm after training and set up on a high street in North London. When I was admitted as a solicitor back in the 80s, there were very few women solicitors around, and so I probably was one of the first women to set up a practice, but it wasn't really an issue. There wasn't a barrier to doing it. I think it was just, perhaps it was just new for us. Rolling forward now, 40 years, women actually make up 52% of the solicitor's profession. So there has been a great change. However, in the larger firms, the dynamics are the same as in most organisations, where women may well be in the majority at entry level, but in terms of progression and in terms of seniority, there remain very serious problems, very serious challenges. I do think, though, that the pandemic has highlighted alternative ways of working, some of which favour women, but also create problems, because I think the biggest problem now is going to be childcare and well-being as we move to hybrid working. I'm in the judiciary. We had a reform program that was in being for years to try to have judges working remotely, and it was stalled, but once we went into lockdown, within weeks, the system was set up, and I now hear cases from home, from this room, and have appellants beamed in to my room, and I'm beamed into theirs. And so there is a complete different way of working for a lot of us as judges. But as I said, in terms of, and other types of working considered are extended court hours, working from earlier in the morning, or from having courts open till later at night, which again are going to mitigate against women, and those more likely to be mid-career and have families. And we know that the burden of childcare and other caring responsibilities falls on women. In terms of the judiciary, you have to have a certain number of years' experience as a lawyer before you can apply to be a judge. At entry level, things are improving, is the highest I'll put it, I think, in terms of gender and race. But again, at the higher levels of the judiciary, there's an issue. And that primarily, I think, is also down to the type of work that is allocated to women in the larger firms. There are still concepts of women's work, conveyancing and family, and the men more likely to be put into banking and finance, doing the much more high-profile work that it is considered by some suggests they merit appointment, as opposed to other types of work. So there are lots of issues still that we have in the legal profession as well. So, as I said, in terms of the profession generally, women have come a long way, undoubtedly, in terms of access, but there are serious issues of progression and retention.
Thank you very much. I'm adding my list of words which I'll use to summarise at the end, but they're very exciting. So, Alison, you were recently appointed Chief Risk Officer and General Counsel at PwC UK. How does it feel to be a female leader stepping up right now, given also what we've just heard Cordella say?
Yeah, no, and it's great to be here, and I'm delighted to hear the conversation, and a lot of it actually read me already. So I took on the role and joined the board in July last year. And it has been a challenging time to step up, I think, but also a really interesting and important time. And I think from a positive perspective, the level of collaboration and cohesion across our board in terms of focus on our people, focus on the strength of our business, and focus on what our purpose means and what it means at PwC has been really strong. And that's been a real positive for me, and a real positive as a leader. We've been facing challenges, but very much together. I think as a female leader, I act on, my sense that it's more important than ever to be a real champion for women in the workplace. I feel a real sense of responsibility to make sure that, women and the progression of our women remains really front and center of our agenda. And that I think we're also authentic about and recognize the stresses and strains, which I think have been very much exhibited over the pandemic, but being honest about those challenges that women face, I think, is really important. And I think, across our people, it's really shown me that as business leaders, we need to be really flexible and adaptable to support all our people's interests, and women's in particular. And things have moved as a result of the pandemic, and we need to make sure that we are capitalizing on that rather than falling back as a result of it. I think about me personally, and Heather will know this from my conversations with her. I have a personal desire to ensure that women can be ordinary as well as extraordinary in the workplace. And what I mean by that is, for those women who look up to you, you don't need to be superwoman. You don't need to be all things to all people all the time to be successful and promotable. There are stresses and strains, whatever your place is in life, whether that's childcare issues, whether that may be helping an elderly relative. There are all sorts of issues which come into the balance, and I think it's important that we continue to have a sensible conversation about the boundaries of home and work, and bring our, I think as Maria says, our genuine selves to work. And I think if we do that, that does take away some of the unrealistic expectations. And I think it's so important that role modeling where women look at, the positions you might be in leadership and feel that's something they aspire to do, and something actually that you as an ordinary woman, it's not out of their grasp. It is something that is very real. So that's really important to me. And I think the whole flexibility that the pandemic's given us in terms of different ways of working. And Cordelia, you're right, that has pros and cons because it can bleed into all sorts of other areas. But I think actually the fact that flexible working has gained validity and people can see that it works really well is going to be a really powerful tool moving forward, actually, to make sure that people are able to have flexibility and adaptability in their roles. So, yeah, a challenging time to step up, I won't lie, but also I think a really interesting time and a time when the dynamics are really changing and we can really do positive things for the future, acknowledging that it's also a time where we have to reflect on the impact on women and the fact that actually we've taken a step back for women in the workplace due to the issues such as the fact that we know more women in the UK than men have been furloughed because of the nature of the industries that they're in. We know that the balance of childcare and home activities has moved more to women. So we've almost got a race to catch up with where we were, but we also have tools now at our disposal to really expedite that, I think. And so that's why I think it's a really interesting time.
Thank you very much. Moving on to you, Mike. our male colleague who's joined us today. So quite usual, we've got panels full of men and there might be one woman, and today we have it in reverse order. So thank you very much for joining us.
And what a great feeling that is. Thank you for that. So I've got slightly, obviously, a different perspective, but hopefully one you find interesting. I've got about 2,500 people under my in my team in Atkins, from architects through to ecologists and many different types of career. And during COVID, we had to put on furlough 500 people, and eventually we had to restructure the business. Fortunately for me, 50% of my team is women. So we were all empowered together to sort of lead what was a pretty fundamental change. So I felt very fortunate in that. And I think during the whole sort of what was a 6 months change, I felt I could look in a mirror and seek different perspectives all the time to the challenges we were facing. So it was having those different perspectives really made me feel as though we were delivering a change that was far more sustainable. I think, we're always challenging ourselves from different lenses on, what would the staff think? What would everyone in the company think? And in the end, we changed our narrative to one that was about economic change, to one that was about people and creating a sustainable future for those of us that were sort of left behind. So that was really, really helpful to me. I think at a practical level, we probably all talked about working from home and teams, but I think that led me to think about this democratization of work. Prior to COVID, those that couldn't contribute at times by being present felt isolated. The occasional call into a management meeting was never that successful. But that's changed. And I think my staff, my leaders who are across the whole country, feel far more connected to each other. And that's brought with us a much greater degree of collaboration, empathy, and just sort of care for each other that I think has led to us sharing work around more, work sharing, and ultimately giving a better service to our customers, because it's made our service delivery much more resilient. That's been a big upside from sort of the world of work. On the downside, often this thing about confidence to network and form relationships, I think it's hard enough at the best of times for people developing their career. In this COVID crisis, it's become virtually impossible. You can connect, but building relationships that are sustainable is found a lot harder. And I think getting that confidence up in everybody who wants to develop their career from any underrepresented community is really the biggest challenge I feel as though we face as we start coming out of the crisis. So there's been a lot of positives. I think there has been more empowerment. We've had to work as a team, as I think Alison said earlier, we've had to be much more empathetic and work together to create more sustainable outcomes. So I think it's a different language. There's a language about building back better, building back different. And I think all of that is helped by just having as diverse a leadership team as you possibly can. So I've learned a load. I've seen personally the impact on working families, but people that are carers and don't have families. So we've really had to be open to many, many more perspectives to come up with a survivable and sustainable business model that got us through what's been a pretty tough year in the private sector. So hopefully that gives you a short perspective from my angle of how it's felt, but I couldn't have done it without that balanced team. And I'm pretty pleased about that.
Thank you. That's so encouraging to hear. And before I go into my summary, and CMI's had an extremely challenging year. We've had to completely change the way that we work, like most organisations, but we're a much smaller organisation. And I think although it's been challenging, it's been absolutely incredible. So providing support for leaders and managers during this crisis, how does it feel to be Chief Exec right now? You're on mute.
It's interesting, Heather, listening to what everybody said. I can draw many, many lessons from that. And of course, CMI has two faces. There is us as an organization, and then there is the work that we do. And really, we've been more challenged than ever to actually walk the talk as an organization. Because we have been pulling together so many of the themes that many of you have referenced. So if you trust people and if you give your organization the care and the focus and the empathy that they need, they can do amazing things. I know back when I interviewed Samantha on my Friday briefing, that came up. She was amazed at what her organization could do. And it is amazing what organizations can do when the people in those organizations feel trusted, they have clarity of communication, and they have empathy. To what all of you have said, we know that those three things are the most important management and leadership traits right now. And equally, we know that management and leadership has never, ever been more important. It is much more important than whether you work in a declining small business in hospitality or a huge global firm in tech that's booming, in the public sector service like the NHS. What matters more than anything is how you are led and managed. And that means that CMI has had an incredible responsibility. So we as an organization have really felt that. And I think that's turbocharged our purpose and made us do things that we didn't think we could do, like pull together manuals, the Better Managers Manual, and disseminate it out for free to over 10,000 people in a very short space of time, like give the amazing public sector managers and leaders in the NHS, in the military, and in the police, awards of special recognition that were very easy for them to get when no bureaucracy in nominating, just to give them that special extra degree of recognition that they were going to be, recognized for what they were doing. We have had more events. Our events have increased several 10 times over. They've all been digital, and yet the engagement in those events has been amazing. And as you referenced, Heather, global. And there were 1,400 people registered for this event tonight. We couldn't have fathomed having that much in a face-to-face event. And as you also mentioned, half of them are from overseas. And of course, helping our partners, so many of whom are learners, and really being there to support them and their learning, which is so disrupted at this time, and doing all of that virtually. So by taking all the things that you have highlighted and trying to put them into practice for the communities we serve, and by practicing all of these management and leadership techniques that you have all referenced in your answers here, we have had an incredible year. We have been growing. We have brought everybody back off furlough. We have actually repaid the money we took for furlough because we haven't needed it. But on the issue of this issue, we still choose to challenge because you have all said that we're at this special point. We're at an inflection point. I call it the COVID conundrum, where on the one hand, we have this incredible opportunity to reset and change the way we work, and you've all highlighted how that needs to be done. And on the other hand, if we don't choose to challenge that, we risk a big setback. So to again quote something else that was said in one of the Friday interviews, we mustn't, whatever we do, restore factory settings. We must take this advantage of this amazing opportunity and choose to challenge the way that we work going forward and build back a more inclusive and diverse economy, which will make us more productive, make us better managers and leaders, give us better growth, and ensure that we have not wasted this crisis.
I like that statement about not returning to factory settings. I shall use that because that's exactly what we don't want to happen. So just to summarize, these are the key points that have come up, and some of the questions that are coming in will cover this. So leadership has been key, confidence in building networks. You've all mentioned in some state, role models, flexible, adaptable, authenticity, empathy, reasonably and responsible, speed, resilience, and empower. So these are all things that are really important for our employees, but most importantly for you as leaders. So I think what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to ask the question to a couple of you, and then I'm going to pick a couple from the audience. So the first question I want to ask actually is, what support do women need after this exceptionally difficult year? And I think I'm going to start with Maria. Just a few
Thank you,
words.
Heather. Yeah, sure. So I think it's not just women actually that need the support. It's all of our, what I'd call our RAF family. So and that's our regulars, our reserves, our civil servants that work alongside us, and their families, and the Air Force community that sits around us. And just a couple of words, Heather. So physical and mental health and well-being are really important. So it's about physical and mental fitness, building resilience, and getting access to help if either your physical or mental fitness and health isn't where it ideally needs to be. That's really important. And then the other area that we're really looking is around supporting our families and our communities. And we can do that using our own service resources, but we've also got an amazing network of charities that support us, like the RAF Association and the Benevolent Fund, SAFA and others, many I could mention. So I think, for me, it's about physical and mental health and well-being, and then looking after our community as a whole.
Thank you very much for that. Michael, you mentioned that 50% almost of your population are women. So I'd like to ask you, what do we need to do to help make sure we retain the women that we've got in our organisations today?
Yeah, it's 50% of our leadership. It's about 30% of our kin staff are women. So some of the things we're thinking about is looking at this maybe a gender gap in confidence, going back to the earlier point on building networks. And so we've got, and I'm sure others have, a women's professional network. We call ours Empower, but we've gone further than that recently, is to look at talent through the lenses of underrepresented groups, as well as what we would normally do. Our normal factory setting maybe is we challenge that. So what happens then, we've got dedicated talent streams for women and underrepresented groups separate to that, the BAME community. And we're planning out conversations with myself, looking at sponsoring and mobility within our own organization, and making sure where those subtle things for progression, like stretch opportunity and strategic projects, that we're going to the talent pools much more objectively than we have done before. When we went to that factory setting, and I'll come back to that, there was a natural knee jerk to say, who's around, who's here, who can we see, who's working late maybe. And so that's a massive challenge to us as leaders. And I think in our space, some of the frontier skills are in AI, digital, and science. And we've noted that we have to work harder to attract people different to myself into those sectors. If those are the skills that are needed to prevent obsolescence in a mid-career, we all need to learn digital skills. We all need to learn a little bit more about technology. So how do we design our learning and development programs so they're accessible for all generations and not just graduates and apprentices? So that's forcing us to think about upskilling while we're sort of flying the aircraft, if you know what I mean. We need all to develop, but we need to develop in different ways. So to make sure we don't render ourselves obsolete, how can we keep that passion for learning, but also how can we as employers make that learning accessible to everybody, so it's more online, it's more inclusive, and it certainly doesn't mean you need to turn up in an office. So there's some practical things there for us. And obviously, we've done a bit of challenging our unconscious bias, so making sure that in our leadership training, we are challenging ourselves all the time on unconscious bias, and really to make sure that where we are making decisions on, let's say, subjectivity, good and bad or different, that we make those as objective as possible. So I'll just leave you with those thoughts from me.
Thank you very much. Alison, I'd like to go to you at the moment, because I think the question that we really need to think about is, what support do women need around mentoring and perhaps sponsorship? And have you had any of those support mechanisms to help you through your career? And I think it would also be really good. good to point out at this moment that there has been a point in your career when you've worked part-time as well, and I think this is an excellent example of a role model that allows you to do that, be a family, and actually be on the board of a big professional services company.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. Yeah, I mean, I think a really important part of my career journey has been actually the sponsorship and mentoring along the way. And I feel really passionate about that. From my own perspective, you're right. I've had a career break. I've worked 3 days a week. I've worked 4 days a week. I've mixed various things as I've gone along, but I've always had consistent mentoring and sponsorship through the organisation to help me along the career journey. And that's given me a lot of confidence, and it's also given me the confidence to go at my pace as well. So that's been really important. What Mike was saying about access to opportunity, I think, is a really important part of the jigsaw. Fair allocation of work and opportunities to give people the ability to show their skills and develop is really important. So actually coaching and development around that area, I think, is really key. And I think that those supportive coaching relationships around confidence and empowerment as well. I was talking to one of my female mentees the other day, and she said she was talking to someone who had 30 years experience, and they were asking her view about a variety of things. And, her default was, oh, I'm not sure I know as much as they do. And I said to her, well, maybe they're asking you because you've got a different perspective and a fresh perspective, and it's different, but it's still equally valid. It's just a different way of looking at it. So I think building that confidence and that legitimacy to be in the room through coaching and development is really important. And I think also the other element is making sure that across an organisation you're building that inclusive culture and making inclusive leadership skills a really important aspect of current leadership, but for your future leaders as well. How do you create that inclusive leadership culture and have those skills? Because I think that really underpins everything else. So those would be my sort of main thoughts around that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Cordella, I really want to ask you the one about employer support and support for those who are self-employed or atypical, just because that's the world that you have really been championing and pushing along.
Yes, but I mean, as I was listening to the conversation, I think just as relevant still, though, is the fair allocation of work. I think in any sector, large or small, in order to help empower people and help them to progress. So as a small employer, I was still looking at my staff and looking for potential. And I think that is one of the things that managers should be doing, not just going to the person that you think can do it. It's actually really looking at that person and encouraging them and bringing out the potential and rewarding it. And I think in terms of that allocation of work as well, it's relevant to the gender pay gap. Because in terms of if you're doing the less attractive areas of work, it is proportionate to what you are then paid. That applies very much in terms of law and in terms of progression, less so to the judiciary, in that all judges are paid the same according to their grade. However, in terms of promotion, the gap will then widen because you don't have the opportunity, because of the level of work that you've been doing, to be able to make that progression. And so you then suffer that salary penalty. So I think so for a small firm, it's probably no different. It's just that for you as the owner, as the manager, as the leader, more falls on you. And so,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it is realizing that it is not just getting an income in, it's trying to develop your people.
All right. Thank you for that. Sam, I would like to go to you about the whole flexible working and reducing hours. We have seen how long hours the NHS have put in and continue to put in, and we won't go into that pay rise business at the moment. We'll leave that at the side. But what do we do? How can you help create a more flexible environment in the NHS, but also look at how you reduce their hours?
Yeah, I mean, a
If
couple
at
of things
all.
there. Yeah, a couple of things there. Firstly, just to say what we don't need, I don't believe we need any more unconscious bias training. There is actually no evidence that it works. And sort of short-term training to get people to make policy changes or changes to practice in organisations where they've acquired those biases over a lifetime through exposure from the media, there is no evidence, sadly, that they work. So that I don't think we need any more unconscious bias training. I think we've got lots of data. And if I was just to take one bit of the NHS and think about doctors, okay, for the last 25 years, women have outnumbered the number of men coming through medical school. And yet, there is something happening in the middling of their career, usually between the ages of about 34 to 43. And what we see is this period where people have got the motherhood penalty. They don't feel that these roles are doable because they do see these long hours that people are working and a significant element of responsibility and a complete absence. We have a very small number, but a real absence of job shares, or being able to do these more senior roles in less hours. So we need to wrap some sort of scaffolding around people to support them through that period. We need the data to track actually the progression of women onto boards in the NHS. At the moment, we do the Health and Care Women Leaders Network. We've done 2 studies through Exeter Business School 2017 and just last year 2020 when we looked at gender and also ethnic diversity on boards. I can tell you that there were 70 NHS trusts that had all white boards, and the average women on boards was about 45%. So we need to reinvent the workplace, I think. And for me, that is about showing what is possible. And I think we need to address some of the deeply ingrained work ethic cultures that, I adore my parents, but they did instill a certain work ethic in us. And we need to role model that for the future. It's actually the younger generation that gives me a lot more hope, because they simply will not tolerate this way of working. And with a service at the moment where we have 100,000 vacancies, if we don't make some of these changes and make them rapidly, then that's going to really challenge us in the future. So it does require leaders to make those changes. We've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you very much for that, Sam. And Anne, I've got 2 minutes allocated for you to tell us around what we can do around the gender pay gap report and why it's important and vital that we keep it going, keep that movement going.
Right. Okay. Well, 3 points. I'm so passionate about this. We did advise the government on the gender pay gap, and I have written a book on it, Create a Gender Balanced Workplace, and we campaigned to reinstate it, and it has been reinstated. 3 things, you've all said them. The first is, and it's not just the NHS or the solicitors or PwC or Atkins, but we've suffered from what we call the glass pyramid, which means we have, just like with the doctors, more women who go to medical school than men in that bottom quartile. But as you rise through the profession, and more women lawyers, you said it too, Cordella, but as you rise through the profession by quartile, those women drop off. And so you go from 60% to 40% to 30% to 20% to 5% CEOs. This is a persistent picture across all professions. So we have to fix that glass pyramid. And I don't care how big or small your organization is, you have to look at it by quartile. And you have to understand what is happening to those women. And this is my second point. You do need to understand and help them to get promoted. And that is sponsorship. So Mike made this point. They need to be encouraged. They need to be told it's okay to go for this, even if you don't have all of those qualifications. They need to be told it's okay to go for it in your own time. You don't have to be that super high flyer. This was Allison's point. Yeah, you can do it in your own time. But they need that sponsorship. You need to advocate opportunities for them when they are not in the room and make them happen. And then the third thing is culture. You've all referenced culture. We need to call out, and I know Heather passionately believes this, we need to call out behaviors that don't support inclusive culture. And we can do it nicely. But if we don't do it, we are complicit in perpetuating that culture because we're normalizing it. So if you see a colleague, I don't care if they're your boss or your peer or somebody who works for you, behaving in a way, a microaggression that isn't appropriate, that is impacting you or somebody else, please call it out and correct it.
Wow, thank you. And within our 3 minutes or 2 minutes. So I want to go to the audience. There are a couple of questions that are up on here, and I'll just pick them up and I'll just probably spend them over to one or two of you to just say, give me a quick recap on that. This one comes from Natasha Clegg. What in your experiences have been successful ways to persuade men of the importance of gender equality initiatives in the workplace? And I think I'm going to go to you with that, Mike.
Oh, my goodness me. What initiative?
You're doing it already.
I know. So I think you've got to there's some basic things. I think if you're curious about people and curious about life, then you'll succeed in the 21st century. And I think that means you're curious about different people with perspectives to you from whatever. And I think, being interested and passionate about developing people. I dug out the 10 things you needed to be an acting director, and at least 3 of them are around developing people with an empathetic and cultural bearing. And that goes back to 2008. So I think being curious, being open, and wanting to get better yourself every day, and not just technically, but emotionally and sort of psychological. I think that's, being open. I think that's what's worked for me, I think. And just enjoying being in a business that reflects society more than it used to when I joined the business in 1982. So I think just enjoy celebrating that difference, I guess, if that helps.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This question, Alison, I'm going to pass to you. What advice would you give universities and other education providers on how to prepare female students for senior leadership roles in their future careers?
I think there's a number of areas. I think first of all, it's how women feel about themselves. Engendering confidence and empowerment in women right from university for the future, and a real sense of that everything is possible. I also think actually the sense in which you can do this on your own terms. You do not have to follow a particular well-worn path of the past. Actually, things are changing, and I think that change will accelerate. And if you are talented and committed, then there are a number of ways to go up the leadership path, and you shouldn't be put off by what's gone before. So I think really enabling women to see that future path is a real key aspect of it for me. Being curious, having a level of confidence, making sure people are getting supporters and mentors from an early age, actually, to help them steer their careers. All of those things are really important, I think, from the get-go in terms of women's aspirations and actually helping them through.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maria, this question's for you. How can you avoid burnout when it feels like I have to work harder than my male counterparts just to earn respect?
So I think it probably goes back to what I was talking about in terms of what sort of support do people need right now. It's been a difficult year, and actually, careers can be challenging and difficult as well. And it's about understanding, I think, how you gain and maintain your own personal resilience. So a good organisation will enable you to do that. And that's important, but it's also about having personal responsibility as well for looking after yourself, for looking after your physical fitness, for looking after your mental fitness, and making sure that you do take those opportunities to energize and recharge, however it is, whether it's walking around the garden, whether it's doing a yoga session, whether it's catching up with friends or family. It's whatever you need to do that gives you that opportunity to recharge your batteries. It's really important, I think, as organizations, that we create space for our people to do that, but also that people take personal responsibility as well for their own personal health, their personal, if you like, a wealth of energy within inside them.
Thank you. I'm going to remember that tomorrow, as I start off every day by saying I'm going to go for a walk, and something gets in the way of me getting up from this desk. So I'm going to take personal responsibility tomorrow. And this one comes from...
So Heather, so what you can do is you can take control of this. So I can never get out and go for a walk. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll start the day with something. So I get up half an hour earlier and do it then. And at least then I know all day I've done it. I can tick it off.
I've done that as well. And it sets me up for the day. Apart from those mornings when I have to start really early. And then I can't go out walking at 6:30, it's too dark. But you know what? Maybe I need to do it, because if I had to do it for someone else, I would make the time to do it. Yeah. And this is a long question, but with a very short answer, please. It comes from Arzu Olasor. The stats show that the crisis affected women much more than men in terms of job losses and heavier share of family and homeschooling work at home. How does the support mechanism around women's engagement in the labour market need to change to address this backward step?
It's a great question.
So,
yeah, but it is a great question. So firstly, we need much more overt policy thinking about the impact of policies on women. And that is very, very obvious. The fact that childcare wasn't considered in the first lockdown, it wasn't even open, stuff like that cannot happen. We need more policy considerations at the heart that consider the impact. And that is incredibly important when we build back better, because a lot of these industries, technology, energy, infrastructure, are incredibly male dominated. And if we are not careful, we are going to make a huge mistake. So I think that is my major support mechanism. That and things like shared parental leave and flexible working for everybody, men as well as women, want to do it. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. This one is for you, Dr. Cordella. What career advice would you give a 15-year-old schoolgirl about a future top career as a woman?
Well, I think I certainly wouldn't put them off them off law. And in fact, in terms of support, just going back to that briefly, I think networks are just so important. And that was the reason that we set up BSN. And as I said, it has done a tremendous amount in terms of progression, but access to the profession, but also in terms of reporting. It was one of the first organisations that actually had firms reporting on their gender and ethnicity and publishing the information. But because of the pandemic and working from home and being on Zoom all the time, I'm actually approached quite a lot by students. And in the past, if they contacted me on LinkedIn, I'd think, well, I don't think I really have the time. But I have been able to find the time and make the time and speak to a number of young people and also schools during this period. And I do think it is incumbent on us as senior women and leaders to engage more with our young people and giving them that encouragement and that informal mentoring. In terms of any specific careers, I mean, there's a wealth of careers out there. I brought out an education and careers guide for young people that was running for 3 years prior to the lockdown, to give young people a range of options, not just law. And in fact, Atkins was one of the companies that supported that publication as well. So there are a lot of things out there, and it is networks are just so important.
Thank you. Sam, I've got a question from another Sam. It's a long question, but I don't think it needs a long answer. NHS boards are 45% representative of women in executive and non-executive positions. The medical director and chief finance office roles are the lowest. This is in spite of women outnumbering men leaving medical school for over 25 years. 1 in 8 surgeons are female. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that was the comment I put in the chat, Heather. But my thoughts on that is, I was answering a question that was posed earlier. I think that there's more we need to do. I think.
Let me give you another question then. This comes from Gabrielle Morcello. There are some cultural obstacles to gender equality. For example, a female leader and mum would be addressed like, oh, look, she's a manager and also a mum. How good, but the same does not apply to men. What is the next step to complete this cultural shift?
Yeah, it's a really great question. In fact, the Women Leaders Network I chair, we've done some research recently where we've interviewed a whole series of women leaders, and actually women, this was in the NHS, struggle to identify themselves as a leader. So we talk a lot about we, not I, and actually we're a Women Leaders Network, and yet a lot of women leaders think it was for them. So I think, again, some of these inherent kind of traits kind of exist, and there was another really good short film that you can watch on YouTube actually into primary school, I think just in the last couple of years, and with young children, asking what does a doctor look like, what does a firefighter look like, what does a police officer look like, and most of them as men. So this thing of kind of gender norms, and even myself as a chief executive leading an organisation of 5,000 staff, if my name gets shortened to Sam in the press, I will be misgendered. I will be called a he. So some of these kind of framing is kind of society. And again, if you go into clothes shops, you look at the terms put on t-shirts. So this is a sort of societal thing, but I think what we need to do as women is we need to occupy some of the spaces. We need to use days like today to celebrate, the brilliant work that women are doing, and ensure that young people, so the question earlier was really important, as well as people in the workplace, can see that they can do these jobs actually.
Thank you. So I'm going to take 2 more questions, but before I do that, just to give you a few minutes to think about our closing questions to you, I'm going to ask you all to think of your 2 top tips for how not to regress and how to progress. Right, so your 2 top questions, you've got 2 top tips, and in the meantime, I'm going to take another question. I think, Anne, this one's going to come to you. What has been your biggest challenge in your career, and how did you succeed?
Oh, well, in 30 seconds or less.
You can have 2 seconds.
My biggest challenge, and I'm very candid about this, I had a number of C-suite roles as the first and only female executive after a very, very successful middle and junior and middle career with major global companies like P&G, et cetera. And when I was the first and only woman in each of those C-suite roles, and I was very othered. I was bullied. I was, made to feel very lonely, and none of those roles ended well for me. And I got so crushed by that, I dropped out of the corporate career. I dropped out of corporate. A lot of women do this. I suppose you could say I hit the glass ceiling. This was in the early 2000s. I just took a extended family break for 3 years. And then I had to come back into the workforce and I had to redefine myself. And actually, I decided that I wanted purpose and I wanted to run an organization that had purpose. And it led me to the role I do now, which I absolutely adore. So through that failure and through reflecting on what was really important and what really mattered to me, I found my true north. I never compromised my principles and stayed in organizations where I did not feel valued and I felt that, that they were not in line with my values. And so that would be my advice to you. Always be true to your values. And if you're in the wrong place and you can't change it, find your true north and go to a different place.
Thank you for sharing that with us and being so authentic about that, because I think there'll be many women, actually many people will be in that place, especially after the pandemic. And people will be rethinking their careers, thinking about their family commitments, but most importantly, being bold and thinking, actually, I need to get out of this and do something completely different. So it's always good, as I mentioned before, to hear from authentic leaders who actually share their stories. So you'll have a little bit more time because I don't have to close this session until 6:43. So that means we've all got some time to think about the answers, and I think we could probably do it in 3 or 4 minutes each. Shall I start with Cordella? Dr. Cordella, your two tips for how not to regress and how to progress.
I think the main one, is in terms of all these data that we collect and what use we make of it. And I think it is that continue to collect the data, however, use that data to develop policies that will cause a shift in culture. There is no point just continuing to collect it. It's the same as the argument, the discussions that we have about unconscious bias, whether it works or not. A 2-hour session training course at the end of a all-day conference is not going to make any difference at all to anything. So, of course, it's not going to work. If you're going to embed it across the organisation on a long-term basis with other things, then it has value. So it is really putting some value on the data. And then I think, and going back again, is really recognising potential, and for managers and leaders talking to their staff, because I think that there is often a you just get on with it. That's what you're here for, and you get on with it. And I think it is talking to your staff and being concerned about career development.
Thank you very much. Mike?
So a couple of things from me. I've obviously made many mistakes in my time. So I thought keep believing, be clear on your purpose and get used to articulating that through ambiguity, and setting a vision for the generation that's around you, not me. Don't follow me. Don't do what I did. That was for my time. And focus on people, and I think people, and really find some allies. There's loads of people now want to help. I think if you ask in your organizations, can you give me some mentoring, give me some coaching, there's loads of people that want to help now. I think the crisis has helped us with that. And I think another one, prepare yourself for leadership, maybe. I think Maria said, take ownership of your resilience, develop your support network. It doesn't have to be personal resilience. It could be through a team or through the way you organize your teams. Prepare yourself for accountability and potentially the loneliness of being a leader sometimes. So it's quite important when people look at you, they'll look at these things and say, this is an accountability you're going to take as a leader for many different things, not just one thing. And sort of and say, how can you deal with stress and inevitable strife and struggles that come along the way, and where do people go to? So be clear about that and have your own resilience plan to help you go through what can be sometimes a lonely job.
Thank you very much. Sam?
Thank you, Heather. I'd want to start by saying it's okay not to be okay. A lot of us have been working hard through a pandemic and a crisis. doing our best in recovery. We haven't been able to go on holidays like we would, take time out, so it's okay not to be okay, would be kind of my key message. I think also our workforce will have a long memory. They will remember how, as leaders, we have treated and supported them during this process, the decisions that we've made and the impact it's had on them. So workforce wellbeing has got to be, I think, the standout priority for all businesses, all organisations, and for us, it's about just enhancing that. And just today, the government started a 12-week consultation on a women's health strategy, and I think actually forward-looking organisations will be those organisations that have a bespoke health and wellbeing offer for their women of their workforce, whether that's through menopause, pregnancy, etc., etc. So remember, people, we are in a crisis. It's okay not to be okay, but people will have a long memory, and the decisions that we take now will be lasting for us, into the future.
Thank you very much. Alison, can I get your 2 hints, tips?
Yes, no. Similarly to Cordella, actually, I think having access to the data. I would say this because I'm PwC, but actually, properly understanding the data and where you have issues, so you know where to target policies and affect change, is really important. And allied to that, I think actually setting real targets and being open and publishing those targets and being accountable for where you are with respect to them. Because unless you're prepared to do that and actually push the steps necessary to get there, I don't think we're going to make the progress we need to make. So I think understanding the data, holding yourself accountable are really important elements of it. And I also think, to the regression point, just picking up on an earlier point, I think we also need to focus on, as well as the inequalities in paid work and what we see in the workforce, the inequalities in unpaid work as well. And so we are promoting and championing schemes like parental leave, whether it's flexible working, whether it's affordable childcare. I think, as businesses, as government, as policymakers, we have to look at it in the round. And it's really important opportunity now. We have regressed, and actually we've got to really double down on efforts to get back to where we were. So I think that focus is really important, and we now have the platform to do that.
Thank you very much. Maria.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So I spoke to a group of young women this afternoon, and I gave them a couple of my tips. And I perhaps turned those tips around to be organisational tips, but I told them to seize opportunity and to challenge themselves. So if we look at that from an organisational perspective, seize opportunity. So I think we can take the best bits from different ways of working over the last year. So that ability to work flexibly, to put alternative working arrangements in place, recognising the modern family, which is not the traditional family. This is kind of new to the military, but it's something we're getting good at. Generating better work-life balance for people and continuing to accelerate digital transformation, be it virtual collaboration, virtual recruitment for the organisation, using better HR tools, using smartphone technology. These are all things that we've been able to really accelerate this year. So let's seize opportunity, and then challenging ourselves. We've just hit some internally quite demanding targets around recruiting women and recruiting people from an ethnic minority background, which is brilliant. We hit this year's targets, and we're going to push the boundaries and keep going, because until we get an organisation which is representative of the society we're here to serve, then we shouldn't rest. So seize opportunity and challenge ourselves. Those are my tips.
Thank you. And Anne, I'm going to finish with you.
Well, I think these tips have been amazing, and I'm going to add 2 different ones. From the opposite, what Maria did, I'm going to talk with those of you who have joined us as individuals, but you can do this organizationally as well. So my first is about how not to regress. Please, please choose to challenge microaggressions in your cultures, because as long as that behavior is seen as normal, and it may not be intentional, but as long as it happens day in and day out, and we all know it happens, we will not change that culture unless we speak up and challenge it. So that's my first tip. Choose to challenge that culture and when people aren't behaving inclusively. My second tip was said earlier, and that is either be a sponsor or find a sponsor. It is so important. If you're in a senior position, sponsor somebody more junior than you. It is that simple. Find somebody you admire, give them an opportunity, ask them how they are, make them visible, and give them that support and visibility. If you are somebody that wants to develop your career, find somebody that thinks that you have potential and talent and make yourself available to them and suggest that how could you help them further? Maybe you're a digital native and can help them with things, whatever it is. So those are my two tips. Challenge the culture and either be a sponsor or get a sponsor.
Thank you. At this point, I would really like to say a huge thank you to our distinguished panel for being so authentic, so honest, and so giving of your time. It takes on a day like this, when you're all doing lots of things in your organizations as well as outside, to give up your time to come and share with our managers and our leaders and our members. Your experience is really, really well appreciated. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you all. And to the audience, thank you so much for all of your questions. I'm so sorry we couldn't get through all of them, but what I should suggest that you all do is make sure you connect on LinkedIn with each of our panelists. Follow them around, see some of the amazing things that they're doing, get to know them, get to know some of their connections, because that's what helps you, as well as all the other things you've heard. And please choose to challenge. So my area of challenging this year was about microaggressions. I've decided I'm not going to accept them anymore, and I'm not going to watch anybody go through any microaggressions and not say anything. And microaggressions come in many, many very types. They're very subtle sometimes, and sometimes they're not. But we know it's just not acceptable. So as we say goodbye to our panel and we say good night to an amazing International Women's Day, remember, we're celebrating this topic not just for today, not just for tomorrow, but actually for the rest of the year. We're going to keep going, and we're going to keep going with the whole pay gap reporting till they get so fed up of us that we're not going to have to ask for them to do it again. It is going to keep going because it's important that we do that. And of course, if we can do that and do it well, so ethnicity gap reporting will just come just like that, right? It needs leaders like yourselves to help us. So once again, thank you very much for your time this evening, and thank you very much for our audience. I'm going to hand back over to our facilitators who will take you into the network. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, Eva. Hi, everyone. I'm Niamh Mulholland. I'm the Director of External Affairs here at CMI. Wow, I found that discussion fascinating, so I hope you found it useful and enjoyed it. So now we have 45 minutes for networking. And you will see along the tabs at the top of the event microsite a tab that says networking. And so you need to click on that and choose which room you would like to go into. So we have 5 topics for you this evening to choose from. We have becoming a chartered manager, or supporting women into management and leadership, or the power of networks, gender pay gap reporting and action plans, or returning to work and flexible working. And feel free to move amongst those rooms, see what's happening in each of them, and have conversations in all of them. So once you've clicked on the room of your choice, you will be taken through to the networking platform Wonder. And as you enter Wonder, you'll be asked to do a quick sound check and to take a quick photograph, which will be given to you as a profile picture. You'll then go into the virtual networking room where you will see other attendees and hosts floating around, and you can form a circle for conversation with whomever you wish. Each room does have hosts, and you can see who they are for the chosen room, your chosen room, in the Speakers Host tab. Okay, so thank you for joining us this evening. As I said, I really hope you found the event useful and enjoy the networking.